Well, welcome back, everyone. I'd like to first introduce myself. I'm Dr. Cherie Boyer. I'm one of the members of the Faculty Development Day Committee, and I just want to welcome you to the afternoon sessions. We have two sessions this afternoon, one our panel now, and we'll have concurrent workshops after this. I will tell you more about how to access those workshops after this session. So again, welcome. We have our panel today focused on tips for faculty success from our department chairs. And for the next hour and 15 minutes, we will have the opportunity from our department chairs. Our panel today includes Dr. Tejal Desai. She's a professor of bioengineering and a chair of engineering and therapeutic sciences in the School of Pharmacy. We have Dr. Hess. Dr. Christopher Hess is the Alexander R. Margulis Distinguished Professor and Chair of the Department of Radiology and Biomedical Imaging in the School of Medicine. We have Dr. Stephen McLeod. Dr. McLeod is a Professor and Chair of Ophthalmology in the School of Medicine. And we have Dr. Julianne Sosa. She is a Leon Goldman Distinguished Professor and Chair in the Department of Surgery in the School of Medicine. Welcome. So the way this is a little bit different than our sessions earlier today. This is a discussion. We won't have any formal presentations or slides for you to view today. But what I'm going to be asking is for our chairs from their perspective to provide you with specific advice. To place this workshop in context of the entire day's event, our faculty participants have already heard about faculty compensation, advancement and promotion, and the university's vision and mission for achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion. To complement these experiences, it is our hope that from your perspective as department chairs, you provide our participants with specific and concrete tips and tools they will be able to utilize when they experience barriers or unanticipated issues that may impede their ability to accomplish their goals for promotion and advancement or fulfill their roles and responsibility as faculty at UCSF. For this session today, we have three sources of questions that will guide our discussion. We have several specific case-based vignettes that we will use. But primarily, we will have questions from our faculty participants today. So I want to encourage you to submit your questions, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible. And we apologize in advance if we do not have the opportunity to answer your specific questions, but I'm sure our panelists won't mind if you reached out to them via email afterwards. And then the third source of questions or questions that were submitted by our faculty during online registration. So we will alternate between those various sources of questions. So I'd like to start with a question, and I'm gonna direct it just arbitrarily to Dr. Hess. And this question was submitted in advance by a faculty member focused on productivity during the COVID-19 pandemic. The question is, what are some work from home tips for maximizing productivity? Please address this for faculty with and without significant childcare responsibilities. Though I've asked Dr. Hess to start, I would like our panelists to chime in as they feel able to do so.
Thanks, Cherie. That's a great question. I think one we're all kind of struggling with, especially with the idea of, with an equity lens. I think, working from home, in particular the childbearing and child rearing, it seems to fall more on women than it does on men. And so I think we're all very concerned that, a year from now, we'll be looking at kind of accelerated inequities that are created essentially through that kind of stall period in productivity because of COVID. I think the way I've encouraged my faculty to look at this is really, we try to stagger shifts. We try to create additional hours and create additional working opportunities. I think there's been a lot of discussion across the School of Medicine, for example, about how to stop the clock and how to make sure that the promotions cycle is on schedule. But I think the real concern on the part of a lot of our faculty is, this doesn't really match up with the funding cycle. And then how are we going to make sure that we support our faculty reasonably down the road. So in terms of clinical productivity, I think we have, various mechanisms to work from home, whether it be telehealth or, teleradiology in my case. But the research is really where I'm concerned. I don't know, Tejal, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's definitely an issue that I've thought a lot about and has spent significant time on, because I completely agree that this is, it's an unprecedented time in so many ways. But what I worry about is this widening gap in terms of the representation in science and the impact that COVID will have on that. And so, I think building off of what Chris said in terms of trying to think about ways to stop the clock, I think here and now, some of the things that we're trying to do is actually figure out, are there other funding mechanisms that can help support particularly research faculty during this time? We have mechanisms for sort of conventional bridge funding, but we're really trying to put into place mechanisms by which those who don't have the time right now to apply for that R01 in October, to be able to help keep the people in their labs in order to make that next deadline, or get help such as grant writing staff or technicians or others that can actually help on the ground level. Because sometimes it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of time, and the money sort of allows us to gain some of that time back and be able to balance the competing needs. But I definitely am very cognizant of that. And I think one of the things I also just want to stress is that I think we need to put this into perspective. This is a monumental time. It is not normal as usual. And so when people say, I am submitting 8 grants and 20 papers right now, that's great. But we need to keep in mind that, even if we did nothing at this time, we need to support the people that are here. And that we need to make sure that they're successful.
A part of that question had to do with the issue of childcare, those with and without childcare responsibilities, and that's a big theme for many of our faculty. Well, frankly, for parents all over the country. And I wanted to know if either Dr. McLeod or Dr. Sosa could chime in on maybe some strategies or tips that you've encountered, or what you might be telling your faculty.
Well, I guess what one of the things that we try to recognize, just in terms of nuts and bolts, is part of the problem with the work from home mentality is that it almost as if it shifts the work to 24 hours a day. And I think recognizing for faculty that the fact that they're at home does not mean that they could get onto a Zoom call, any time of day or night. Little things like, we've been made aware of is it's actually for many of the faculty more difficult now to have morning sessions for things that are group, because if you sort of have to keep an eye on the kid being homeschooled, they're pretty much all doing it in the mornings, and many of the schedules just become a little more manageable in the afternoons. Bearing that in mind, though, you don't want to get into dinner time. So the things you just need to try to think about, and I think that what we find helpful is we don't know what everyone's schedule is like. It's hard to know what the pressures are, so we're asking people to share with us what are the things that we can do in the things that we're asking for as a group that can at least be cognizant of where these changes in schedule are demanding. On the clinical side, the other thing we've been trying to figure out is how we can do the staggered schedule thing and be a bit more flexible. A lot of people, for the same reason, are trying to move clinical things to the afternoon. But I think that communication with the department, and sort of, because I think people are very well-meaning, but it's helpful to know what things can be done differently to try to ease the burden at least a bit.
Yeah, so thank you for this question. There's probably no more pressing question facing all of us right now, and it's a question not only for our faculty, but perhaps even more dire for our staff and our learners. So I think we are all sharing in this burden. I think second of all, I don't think any of us have the cure. And people should know that our chairs group talks about this all the time, and we share best practices. So I steal ideas from Dr. Hess and Dr. McLeod and Dr. Desai and vice versa. And I think it's this idea of communication and exchange, not only within each of our departmental communities, but across the School of Medicine and UCSF Health, where we can try to innovate, actually be creative about this. I think it is important that junior faculty feel that they should be emboldened to speak up and speak out about their challenges to their section chiefs, their division chiefs, their chair. There should be no shame. There should be no reluctance to say when you're in trouble or really struggling, because the intervention will be more effective the sooner it is made. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say is there are many things about working at home. And in fact, I'm still figuring this out. It took me way too long to figure out that working on my bed or on top of a dog cage didn't really work as a desk, and maybe I should just order a desk. And by the time I'd ordered a desk, of course, there's like a 5-month wait for the desk. So I think focusing on concrete things you can do, like Dr. McLeod said, staggering your schedule, 2, putting up barriers around your time, like the day starts at a certain hour, the day ends at a certain hour, and it doesn't become some malignancy that extends to midnight or starts at 5 a.m. Optimizing space, formalizing responsibilities and schedules, building in breaks in the day. This is something I didn't do, and I didn't think about ergonomics. So changing the space I work in one day to the next so that, I don't need a spine fusion when this is all over. So I would also empower people to think locally in their microclimate about stuff to do that just makes the days seem less long.
Those are excellent, absolutely excellent tips. And I will take a few for myself as well as we continue to navigate our way through this pandemic and try to remain productive in the process. I will shift gears a little bit. I mentioned vignettes, and I want to pose to you as panelists and as chairs a vignette. And it says, my chair wants me to take on more administrative responsibilities. So let me just read to you the case of Faculty A. Faculty A is an assistant professor, step 4. He has a very busy clinical practice that includes 5 half-day clinics and 16 hours of call per month, leads 2 blocks in a Bridges curriculum, and directly mentors 3 residents and 2 fellows. In addition, his local school is closed. It's closed due to COVID, the pandemic, and he's responsible for supporting remote learning for 2 elementary school age children on the days that he is not in clinic. We could see this theme that's heavy on the mind of our faculty. Without warning or any prior conversations, his department chair requested that he lead the department's new QI program. Faculty A feels that he has always been a good citizen and is willing to pitch in for the short term, but feels his chair's request is unreasonable and may potentially jeopardize his ability to pursue other creative interests and support his family's needs. However, he does not know how to communicate his concerns to his chair in a productive way so that as a mutually agreeable solution could be found. So questions for you, what would be helpful for him to do prior to meeting with his chair, given these issues? What is your advice for Faculty A, and what arguments could he use to respectfully discuss and decline and negotiate his chair's request? Any panelists could start with this if you have some great advice to start out with.
I can just at least
Thank
start.
you. Sure.
So, I think one thing to keep in mind is that chairs try to know what's going on, but they don't always know what's going on in the lives of faculty. And so, as Dr. Sosa said, being transparent about what you are doing, both inside, professionally, personally, is a very effective means to be able to help us understand what is it that you can take on, and what is now at this point too much. There's this trade-off, because there are opportunities sometimes that we want our faculty to be cognizant of, and we think they're great and well suited, but we may not know you're doing 5 other things in this other realm. So if you can come into a meeting saying, this is what I'm doing, these are the things I am, have prioritized. Maybe you're interested in this, but if I do this, can I be relieved of this other item? Those might be some strategies, at least in a meeting scenario.
Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I really like that answer. I think that's right. I think a couple things, one is allyship. And sometimes, the conversation doesn't have to always just be between you and the chair, but there's some moderators like your section and your division chief, or a mentor or a sponsor who can perhaps be more courageous in expressing on your behalf with you, as your advocate and ally, the reservations that you have about taking up positions. So I think it gets back to this idea of communication, which I think is pretty important. And then the other thing, and this is again the broker of the ally can help, is if you take on a position that seems overly ambitious and maybe even distracting, make sure that you are resourced to succeed. And I think that's the problem, particularly when you're junior. You're just so excited to be offered a title, or you feel empowered, but then you realize the next day that you have to set up the meetings and you have to, print out the stuff. And I think too rarely people use allies to help bounce ideas off, but also to have these sometimes difficult conversations, at least to have them before you have them, so it sort of paves the way. So that might be one piece of advice.
And maybe I can amplify that a little bit. I mean, I think the themes you're hearing here are transparency and communication, effective communication with your chair and with others in your department. The reality is we do well. We do really well with administration at UCSF, right? We were kind of always building bureaucracy and administration. But as a chair, the last thing, I don't wake up every morning and say, well, how can I create some more administrative responsibilities and assign them to faculty? The way that I personally look at it is, how do we align? I mean, I think what all chairs want to do is they want to match faculty interests and talents to what the needs and opportunities in the department are. And so to that aspect, I think I would say that, one very important strategy here is to be part of the solution. So if for some reason a chair does come to you and ask you to take on a responsibility that you're not particularly interested in, try to understand, be clear about why you're not interested, but also what is the role of this position? And, is there another person in the department you think would approach it well? And, could you be part of the solution there, just to kind of maintain a consistent dialogue? And in terms of tips, I couldn't agree more with Dr. Sosa in terms of the idea of developing an ally. I would take that a step beyond. I'd say develop a lion. Have someone on your faculty. I used to use it as cover, actually, to be, people would come with administrative responsibilities, and I'd say, well, that's a great opportunity, but I've got a lot on my plate, and I've been told by my mentor that I cannot accept any new responsibilities until I check with them. And so that person can be a lion for you if you kind of develop that strategy.
Dr. McLeod, any additional thoughts in this regard?
Yeah, it's interesting because the challenge. I think that it's been very, very well said, especially the issue about essentially a thoughtful chair is actually going to try to align opportunity with the individual. So you can imagine a scenario where along the lines of communication, someone just doesn't realize that this is not something that person would be interested in. I think the tension is always that. While some of these things are seen as administrative, some people will see them as an opportunity to establish a voice in leadership. And you can actually be failing on the other side, which is failing to broadly consider people for these opportunities and always going somewhere else. So I think that these administrative things could be seen as burdens. Some people will see them as opportunity, and understanding how each party sees them is really a really critical part of the beginning of the dialogue. And I think that chairs by and large really do want to make sure that people are in the right spot.
Those are very excellent advice for our faculty. I just want to remind our participants, please send in your questions. You have a really unique opportunity to hear from some very expert advice from department chairs. And I want to add here, you may notice that we don't have a chair representing the School of Nursing. And unfortunately, our person that was going to be on the panel had a last minute conflict that couldn't be changed. So we apologize for not having representation from the School of Nursing, but we're very aware and know that that's missing in our discussion. But again, you have an opportunity to send in your questions. So please type them in and we'll be looking for them and hopefully get a response for you. I will shift gears again. And this was a question that was submitted in advance during registration. And this is related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We just heard from Dr. Navarro about the school's mission and vision. So it's heavy on the mind of many of our faculty. And this question says, in your role as chairs, please comment on diversity, equity, and inclusion and approaches to building the pipeline with a particular focus on Black and African American faculty, but also just speak to what is your vision and how would you approach feeding the pipeline so that we can continue to have a diverse faculty.
That's a gigantic topic.
Okay, Dr. McLeod, please go ahead. Please start and we'll hear from everyone.
Obviously there's been a very involved, very intense conversation about, and I think the starting point for many is at least the understanding that this, for so many individuals and for us as a community and group, is a really important thing. And so, depending on the microcosm of the area where a particular person works, the dynamics are going to be different, the strategies are going to be different, the pipeline challenges are going to be different. And so, I think that the globals that we can go to are, do we as a community actually have a durable and long-standing commitment to the pathway? Because there are so many pieces in our system that are going to have to be consistently touched to make a difference for the long term. That sort of encapsulating it in a sort of single silver bullet strategy is just not going to happen. I mean, so for in our department, it's sort of the range of things that we have to look at and consider, all the way from what's happening in our professional societies and how much of a contribution are we making there, and what are we doing locally, and how do we think about it for our medical students and our learners and our residents and our fellows, and how we think about it for junior faculty. And I mean, it's and so once you start, it's a little bit overwhelming, but I think at the end of the day, if for the wide range of decisions that we have to make as we conduct our daily business, this is integrated into your decision-making process, then that goes a long way. And I wish I could be more granular, but good heavens, it's such a big topic.
It is.
And
Dr.
maybe
Desai?
maybe I'll just add, I mean, this is, I think, a particular issue within the basic sciences at UCSF, and one in which many people have thought long and hard. I think there are so many, as Dr. McLeod said, there's so many levels at which we have to both examine and intervene. But I know just from a tangible standpoint, from a basic science perspective, we are looking for ways in which we can really not just sort of say, here's a training, let's educate faculty, but really have conversations and facilitations of how do we make culture change. And so that is everything from sort of thinking about how we do our search committees, and we have this notion of fit, which by itself is problematic, to really to the chalk talk and how we sort of position senior faculty against a faculty and sort of set up that dynamics. So it's every little thing that I think we are starting to look at, but we have a long way to go, and it's going to start with really changing the culture at a very fundamental level.
Yeah, this is the $1 million question, and it's been the $1 million question for a very long time. And fortunately, it's been brought to the foreground now. I think that UCSF, I'm not a UCSFer, I'm relatively new to UCSF, but having lived in other academic environments, I would say we're closer to being the leading edge than any other institution I've worked at, which is not to say there's not huge opportunity. And just as Dr. Desai says, the basic sciences are tough, man. Surgery's as tough as it comes. And the example I would give in our department is, we've had a woman chair now for more than 20 years. I'm the second consecutive woman chair, which is just crazy exceptional. And that's awesome. But other measures of diversity, we are back with the rest of the pack, and there's huge opportunities. So I think that we have to be active and intentional in everything we do. We have to think about it every minute of every day and live it. All of us are intervening far too late, actually. These are all issues that begin pre-utero. And so, our department, I'll just give as an example, we start as early as we can, which is day one of medical school. We want to start working together with our students. And many of you may know this is the most diverse medical school class. The incoming first years this year are the most diverse class in the history of UCSF, which is an extraordinary opportunity for all of us as chairs to tap into these future residents, fellows, and hopefully faculty. But it's a continuum that we need to think about at every stage in careers. It's never too late. So that would be sort of big picture thoughts.
Yeah, I would add, and I would say it's not the $1 million question, it's probably the $10 million question or the $50 million question. We have to figure out how to make this investment. And I think of basically three things here. I'd say, first of all, we all have to have the kind of cultural agreement that diversity makes us better, and that it makes us better clinicians, it makes us better researchers, and that has to be kind of institutionalized and embedded in our brains. And then the second of all, I think we all need to look critically as an institution, but also in our department, to look at our current structures to see if we're unintentionally creating some barriers to diversity through the search process, through the hiring process, through the promotions process, through the leadership appointment process. And I think there's a lot going on in that space. And I personally have learned a ton from Julianne and others as to how to do that. And then third, I do think this is going to require an institutional investment. We're coming at a point in time with a very long history of inequity, especially when it comes to race. And, in order to overcome that energy of activation, to make a change, to achieve the goal where we all agree that diversity makes us better, we have to be able to put some resources behind hiring diversity, developing new diverse pipelines. And that has to be done at an institutional, at a departmental, and I would say even an individual laboratory level.
Excellent.
If
These are
I
very
can-
thoughtful.
Can
Yes,
I say
please.
one thing, Sharon? I
Yeah.
was really struck by what Dr. Desai said, where she called up that three-letter word, the word fit. And, fit is a word that many of us use, and I think it's well-intentioned. The idea is integration into a culture. But to me, fit always conveys somebody has to mold themselves and change in order to accommodate some size, shape, space. And, one word that we've started to use in surgery is the word belonging. And I really think it's something that we need to strive to do, is to create a culture that can accommodate people of many different backgrounds and make them feel at home. And it is that belonging that I think all of us really need to strive and make our highest, our priority.
Excellent. Thank you. These are very thoughtful comments, and I think that we have a lot to build on, and we have great leadership. And thank you for your contributions to that. We have a few questions coming in. There's one regarding leadership, and this question has to ask: are there any tips for junior faculty to gain leadership roles within the division, a department, and how do you communicate that desire to play a leadership role? And I think that's very important, and particularly in early careers, and how do you begin to develop that? So Dr. McLeod, would you care to start with that, and then we could hear from others?
I would say the very best way to let someone know that you're interested in leadership is to tell them you're interested in leadership. It's actually helpful because, again, sort of harkening back to the administrative discussion we had a little early on, it's hard for a junior faculty, any person new to an environment, to take on a leadership role without having, sort of served in the environment in some capacity that helps, get them oriented and so on. So it does mean that, the appointments have to be judicious, but then letting the leadership know that you are willing to serve administratively with the goal of ultimately leading is really a very helpful thing. The balance there, and again, this is sort of, I think, where the mentorship and the allyship and the lion comes in, because, it's very important, I think, to get guidance from someone who knows the system well, to help decide what battles do you choose, what battles do you not choose, at what point do you decide to give something up so you can move on to the next thing. Because by and large, there is a progression to the leadership role, and it does mean that you can't keep doing everything you start doing.
Excellent. Any other thoughts in that regard?
Mike, go ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Desai?
No, I guess I would just emphasize that point of sponsorship again. It keeps coming up, or allyship, because what I see time and time again is also there will be opportunities, and faculty will say, well, I'm not good enough, or I don't have the skills to do this. I've never been in leadership before. How can I do this? And so I think having somebody who can be your advocate, but also be your cheerleader and say, hey, this is an opportunity you should go for. Because, again, we're trying to maximize that fit, that opportunity for our faculty. And if we don't know that you're interested in it, it's going to be very hard to have those opportunities. So I do think if you can talk to others about your interest and then let them be a vehicle, that could be very helpful.
Dr. Sosa, we have a related question. So I'm going to kind of chime in with another question, and you could maybe add your response to the previous question as well. And it has to do with this notion of sponsorship and mentorship. And the question is, what are some of the effective ways the faculty can find sponsors or mentors in their department? Do you mind giving us some thoughts on that?
Sure. Thank you for that. It's sort of related to what I was going to tack on to Dr. Desai's really excellent response, and that is this idea of micro-volunteerism. So you know, straight out of the gates on day one, you probably, or maybe I'll say, you may not be ready to be a leader at a high level. A, because people may not know you. B, you may not know what you want. C, you may not have yet acquired the fund of knowledge and skill set to be an effective leader. I think some of it is see one, do one, teach one, but some of it is actually you can read and practice with colleagues. So I would say, first of all, look for opportunities at a small level to practice skills and to demonstrate your passion and commitment. And as you succeed in small things as a micro-volunteer, you will be afforded more and more opportunities. I'd say second is train yourself up. So, you know, nowadays you don't have to travel, no big investment to go and stay in Boston for 2 weeks at Harvard to take a executive coaching course. You know, it's participating in choral, participating in departmental initiatives, school level initiatives, university and national initiatives, and sometimes through your professional society. So look for opportunities to gain the skills to make you an effective leader. I don't think it comes naturally to most people. Being a leader today is like super complicated and actually quite hard. And then in response to what you mentioned, you know, I think it is really hard to find a good mentor. There's a lot of bad mentors and very few good mentors. If you are blessed enough to find a mentor, I would say hang on to it, to him or her or them for the rest of your life, because it's a treasure. And I would say go for local and remote mentors. I think different mentors have different insights and strengths and weaknesses. And not only would I be looking within your department and outside of your department, but also in the institution and outside of the institution. Sometimes having someone nowhere near San Francisco is good because they don't get pulled into the politics. They just will give you straight up what they think you should do. But sometimes you really do need that local mentor who knows the politics, who can guide you around the landmines.
Good advice. Anything that you might want to add, Dr. Hess, regarding finding good mentors and types of mentors?
Yeah. Well, I think part of being a good mentor is to look around. I think a mentorship like fruit trees, essentially, when a good mentor is known, it's like a tree bearing fruit, and you'll see a bunch of other people lined up to grab the fruit and be mentored by them. So if you see those people, reach out to them. I mean, I think really what it is you have to be proactive, thoughtful, deliberate about that, and not just kind of wait for things to happen. So if you deliberately reach out, I mean, I can count the number of times that people just reach out to me and say, hey, can we talk about X, Y, or Z? That ends up being the critical step in developing a mentoring relationship, because otherwise, you know, as a mentor, I think you're not necessarily just looking around, you know, who can I mentor? Who can I find out? And you're not trying to do it. So it has to be an active leap of faith process on the part of the mentee. And I also agree with the concept of a mentorship network. We're never talking about one mentor. We're talking about many mentors and many different lenses. And if you make these relationships, you will find out there are good ones and there are bad ones, and you can cultivate the relationships with the good ones and strengthen your overall career development, I think.
Thank you. This is excellent. We have a question. It appears to be from a clinical faculty with clinical responsibilities, and is asking about finding protected time for research. The question is, how can a clinical faculty make time for a successful research career when we're responsible for seeing patients for the majority of our clinical effort without protected research time. It is difficult to start from scratch to obtain an NIH R01 funding, particularly if we have heavy clinical responsibility. And this faculty person said, can you offer some advice?
Maybe I could start that one. So I would say two things. First of all, when I think of building a research career, I think it's a little bit like rolling a boulder off a mountain. You start small and then it picks up steam. So when you develop research ideas, it starts with a small idea, and maybe it's not funded. You're not going to jump into a lab and suddenly be doing electron microscopy and chemistry development or other high level things. You have to start with small ideas, develop them, especially if you're a clinician. You can develop them in your clinical context and study them with your patients, look into medical records. We have very strong processes. I mean, we're surrounded by incredible diversity of clinical cases, which can be used and exploited to really understand, how to answer questions. The other thing I would say is that to the extent as a clinician that it's possible to align your clinical practice to your research interests, they will synergistically add up. So I think it's very challenging, as this commenter pointed out, to etch aside time for a research area that's diametrically opposed or completely different from your research area. It works much better if there's some alignment between what you do every day clinically and then answering that question with kind of limited resources. And then as your program builds and as that boulder rolls down the mountain, then those resources will build up and you can make a case for getting NIH funding. You can make a case for getting foundation funding and building your program from the ground up.
Definitely. Any other comments that could speak to this and advice for protected clinical time? Sure, Dr. McLeod.
So the only thing that I would caution or think carefully about is whether or not there is, again, to the communication, there's a good understanding between the division chief and the chair as to what is the career and the professional aspiration of the individual and how are they actually deployed. Because if there's not a good understanding or of the fact that this is a person who does want to commit to research, then that does create issues with regards to the perception of how deployment really should be executed, through the course of the week. There are always, I think, as is alluded to in the question, there is the question of sort of funding and salary. And when you have clinicians who are funded in one way and salary is structured in one way, that want to incorporate research, there really has to be an understanding of, well, how does that factor into, the sources that are there, the actual salary? Because, quite frankly, a clinical salary is different from a research salary, whether it's funded or not. They're structured differently. And so, really having a clear understanding of what is first and foremost the career goal in the pathway, and then, what actually is needed, even if it's unfunded, to come out of time to try to get there, and what the pathway will be. Sort of really understanding that, I think will be helpful.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
Again, I'm not a clinician, but I think when I look at UCSF, one of the things that I really appreciate is the collaborative nature of the institution. And as a bioengineer, being able to work hand in hand with those on the clinical side. And so, to the extent that if you're interested in research and you can leverage those of us who are excited to work on clinical problems and further the science, I think that's a way to start small and see whether it develops into something else. So not trying to do it all by yourself, but really make those strategic partnerships to see if your idea can go somewhere.
That's excellent. And the theme I'm hearing is collaboration, starting small, or definite tools for young faculty who are wanting to do research in the context of the clinical responsibilities. So there's a related question to research, and maybe Dr. Sosa, you could talk to in your department as chair, how does K Awards factor into the research program development for young faculty? And I'm sure that varies from department to department, but can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, thanks for that. Sort of as a preamble and just to tie it to the thread of the prior discussants, I think another important thing to know is, there are different tracks, merits and promotions tracks at UCSF. And like in surgery, I think there, to some degree, is still some type of antiquated belief that there's some hierarchy among the tracks and that everyone should want to be in residence, and that if you're not that, then somehow that's not good enough. And, I don't think that is contemporary or true at all. And, I think the important work of the chair, together with the young faculty member, is to make sure, you're running in the right race to the correct finish line to follow your passion. And in the end, the best department is a department that, like a bouquet, is full of many different colors, not just all red or all white. And you want excellent in residence track, you want excellent clinics, you want excellent HS clinical. And so I think it all really starts with who you are and what is your passion, and to try to match that with the correct track and finish line for you. No one can tell you that, only you. And this may evolve, and this is something we see in our department, that it can evolve, meaning people can change. They come in believing they're going to be a scientist, and then they realize that they're actually one of the most gifted educators in the department, which is not to say you can't be a scientist, but you have to be flexible, and the department needs to be flexible and have communication with you to accommodate this change. Now, when it comes to Ks, Ks are challenging in American surgery, and they're challenging because of the salary cap. And the salary cap is, yes, it's getting higher all the time, but it still is relatively low compared to many surgical salaries. So what is in fact the case with Ks is, we subsidize, heavily subsidize Ks. And I will say our department happily does so because we believe in the surgeon scientist phenotype. I think it's a unique role that UCSF surgery can play. But for full disclosure, I'm constantly harassing the NCI and the NIH saying that there's not equity in terms of how we treat surgeon scientists. And I suspect the same may be true for other proceduralists. And with the K, we try to identify candidates who we will support to a K. We create a calendar, usually 3 to 5 years, set with expectations and milestones that you would meet to get you there. And if you're not getting there, trying to figure out why you are not. And we invest, because I don't think you can do this by your own anymore. So making sure you have the resources to get there. You can't run fast enough by yourself. You need a coach, you need the right sneakers, the right shorts, all of that to get there.
Dr. Desai, could you add a bit more to that as a chair in a non-clinical department? Could you speak to the role of Ks for young faculty?
Yeah, so it's relatively rare in the non-clinical departments, and we may support a fellow, a postdoctoral fellow in the labs for a K, but the expectation is that then they would use that to find a faculty position, go onto the market. And so it's both relatively rare, and we don't use that as a hiring criteria either. So we are, much more looking at their sort of entirety and holistic research and education mission, not just whether they have a K or whether they got a K. But that it's also because we generally have most of our faculty are FTEs and not in residence. So
Sure.
we are limited also in terms of our hiring.
Sure. So there's a question about salary. It starts with a broad question that I think all of you could speak to, but it's also something very specific that I think all of you could speak to. And the question is, what is the best way to negotiate your salary with the chair? And the follow-up to this is, as a faculty, if you have, the person said, had no raise in overall salary in 7 years, even though you've gone up the ranks and have been productive member of the faculty. So the question is, how do you negotiate? But then I think it seemed to be a second part of that, which seems to be a little problematic in terms of not getting raised despite being promoted and receiving merits. Dr. Hess, could you start us out with that, probably addressing that a bit, and then we could hear from other chairs?
So let me try to cover both of those separately. So 2 points, I guess, 1, negotiation, and 2, salary. First of all, negotiation. Negotiation is considered like a tough thing. I think people are afraid to negotiate, and people, I think because inherently they're averse to conflict. They're worried about, creating an environment of conflict. Negotiation, I think, is really just an alignment of understanding. So if you kind of approach your chair, in this case, as the question suggests, and say, I have questions and I want to kind of share what's going on with me, and maybe you can explain what's going on with the department and how you see this question. And, as a chair, I think what we want to do is we want to put ourselves in the faculty's shoes, and we want to understand and kind of come to a mutual understanding of any problem that's, negotiated, as we're saying here. With regards to salary, I guess we're a little luckier in radiology in the standpoint that we use salary scales and targets. So they're directly attached to rank and step, and they're kind of not individually negotiated. So we try to roll out salary increases, for example, cost of living increases kind of across the board. So they're not individually negotiated. I think the reason I say we're lucky is I think in the negotiated position, what happens is that, if you're an effective negotiator or essentially a bigger advocate for yourself, then you can essentially climb and create these inequities over time, especially. So if you negotiate a salary increase and then 2 years or a year later, you're going to negotiate another one, where somebody who's not willing to meet with the chair and step up kind of stays at that point. And so that kind of difference is magnified. But, I'm glad that kind of doesn't happen in radiology. Our comp plan is such that we kind of set salaries based and target, and then we have productivity metrics above that. And the productivity metrics are really according to a standardized formula.
Thank you. Dr. McLeod, could you speak to the issue of negotiation and then maybe perhaps salary as well?
Yeah, that's I think Chris touched on some of the key points. So there's what you read about, negotiating in the negotiating books, the strategies, make sure you have a plan, understand what the other person wants, show that you have value when you still talk about the increase that you're asking for, show how you're going to do something to offset it and bring something new to the, I think that is, you can read the books and that may work. I think I would hope that, as Chris was alluding to, that, and this is, I think, what is really the driving issue for in our department, I think for many of us, is right now, I think that a lot of us are very, very driven by the questions of equity. And so I actually think that if I were to pick one place that I know is a sensitive point for many chairs, myself included, is the concept of equity. And if indeed there is an unintended inequity that has been developed over time, by far and away, I think that's sort of the place to look. but it is tough. Chris, we actually have gone specifically to salary scales for this reason. And those salary scales actually go all the way to the point of hiring a new faculty member. And I've just sort of come to terms with walking away from recruitments if they're going to insist on, on something that's thrown out to make them satisfied that, they've had a successful negotiation, because if it creates an inequity with people coming in, that's just going to get amplified over time. But then it does make it seem as if, you're not really terribly hospitable to the idea of negotiation. But I think, everything that we can possibly do to standardize the way we pay, so that we can get away from inequities that are either, subconscious bias or, the product of negotiating strategies, I think is what will leave us better off as an institution.
Okay, so can you add anything to that? The chair of a large clinical department, speak to negotiations and salary?
Yeah, so how we compensate, and well, first I'd say, these are junior faculty, a lot of people get hung up on salary, and money is important, but we in our department think about compensation, and there are many components of compensation. It's benefits, fringe, retirement, mortgage support, super important in San Francisco. So, when you're thinking about negotiation, I think keep in mind you can negotiate for anything, but you can't negotiate for everything. So you have to pick and choose what is super important to you and go for that, and be strategic about it. Around salaries, I have never been at an institution. This is like the black box of academic medicine. And at UCSF, it's transparent, right? You can go to the Sacramento Bee or Transparent California. The information isn't perfect, but it will give you a sense of what's going on. And I would also let all the young faculty know that as chairs, we are accountable to the dean. Every year, we have to create a report that answers to the dean and the dean's office around decisions we are making around compensation. And I think it is really useful. I mean, it's incredibly important because it compels us to really look through this lens. And we've made significant changes in compensation just over the last 2 years, which is not to say we cannot do better. We must do better. But I will say there is accountability on this at UCSF, which is, I think, one of the many reasons why transparency and UCSF are really unique.
Thank you. I want to start with Dr. Desai. There's a question regarding promotion, and it asks, how can we get feedback, whether we're on track or for advancement and promotion? How can we get regular feedback to know if we're satisfying the requirements for our series?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak to my experience in the department, and I meet with all of my faculty members, every single one of them, every year to see, what has been their progress, what are their goals for next year, where are they along the promotion timeline, what are the issues that are coming up for them, and if there are areas for concern, how can we work together to remedy that? I think, again, I have a relatively small department, maybe in comparison to some of the other larger clinical departments, but you should be getting some feedback. And if you're not, I think you should have no problem going to your chair and saying, I'd really like to talk about where I am and what the trajectory looks like. Again, it's this communication and transparency that I think is critical at this point. But some, I know some departments do an appraisal, some don't. That's a more formal outside evaluation. But a check-in at least once a year, I think, is not too much to ask, particularly at the junior stage.
Thank you. Dr. McLeod, anything to add that could give some information about best ways to get feedback?
Yeah, so
the promotion?
as Tej was alluding to, a lot of it is really in that, and again in that mentorship process, and that's where that ecosystem of mentors is helpful, because hopefully there's someone within that ecosystem who is particularly tuned in to UCSF's specifics with regards to advancement in a given series. The good thing is that I remember, sort of years ago, actually, it was actually Michael Drake who first pointed that. He said, people get all stressed out about this, but the truth of the matter is, in the UC system, with the step system that we have, which is unique, it sort of creates a pathway that you at least have a good sense that on a biannual, if you're in the in the lower series, and a triannual, that you're moving forward. And then if the department incorporates the appraisal system as well, then really there should be no surprises. But again, it's hard not to be anxious, and so incorporating into the mentorship group someone who's really sort of you're tasking with making you feel that you're comfortable with the progress that you're making specifically towards advancement, that can be helpful.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts in that regard? Anything different? Okay. So this question that's been sitting in the queue for me, and I'm not quite sure how you might respond to it, but I think it's an important one, and I think it speaks to where we started the discussion this afternoon, and that is kind of this work-life alignment, right? And particularly in the era that we're all living through the COVID pandemic. And this particular participant asked, what advice would you give to research faculty whose more senior colleagues, empty nesters, feel that there is plenty of time to write grant and submit papers that are all done from home, and they don't mean any harm, but it still puts pressure on early career faculty with kids. So as I read this, it has to do with it. How do you, again, handle the stress of family and as an early career faculty when you have sometimes competing demands? I'll just open it up to anyone who want to start, and then we can see where we can go.
To me, so that's sort of, when I read that question, it's like a generational answer. It's like, that's how I trained. I remember hearing that, it echoed in my ears. But having gone through that, I think most people now today know that is not contemporary, and it's not right to propagate sort of bad habits. And, I think, it is really for all of us on this panel as stewards, and for our vice chairs of research and the like, to craft, offer letters that for those who want to pursue scholarship and innovation, that they can do that and not sacrifice their personal lives for their professional lives. That is true. That is the way it used to happen. But honestly, that cannot continue. And I don't think it will continue as, more young people, those of us who are, I think, more modern and contemporary and understand work-life integration, say to be successful, you have to be successful personally and professionally. You cannot, one impacts the other. And so I think people do need to have time that is not time after 7 p.m. or on weekends to be successful. And I think one of the problems with COVID, right, is that there is no longer even any divide between personal and professional. At least in the old days, it's 8 p.m., you went home, and there's a barrier. But now it's all like one giant continuum, and I think we need to be creative about and working together with faculty to create barriers where none exist.
Thank you. Dr. Hess, can you add to that in terms of
if I understand,
finding that alignment? Mm-hmm.
Well, finding the alignment, I think that's tough, especially when you work from home, as has come up at multiple points here. It's like when we take the job home, then home becomes the job, is the tendency. So you do have to erect very strict boundaries. From that question, I kind of understood that, this faculty member felt that like a senior faculty member didn't understand the expectations. And I think that kind of goes towards a generational thing, like Dr. Sosa was saying. From the standpoint, I think, the old adage is, I used to walk up the hill in the snow both ways or whatever, but that hill was a lot smaller. We have just an incredibly complicated, things are much more complicated than they were back in the day. And they're not just based on time. So, to that faculty member, I would ask, maybe that senior faculty member does have unreasonable expectations, but to what degree are you accountable to their expectations? I think, honestly, it's incumbent on all of us to just put our own boundaries up. You say, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not willing to do. And the systems are much more modernly designed to accommodate kind of an understanding of what our own professional desires are and what our abilities to operate, as long as we put these boundaries up, as long as we're willing to kind of make them be known.
Okay. Dr. Desai, can you, anything to add?
I'll just add one thing. Well, so this, I have been in actually several scenarios and meetings where these same sorts of sentiments have been expressed. And as someone who is feeling, I would say, very much the same way in terms of trying to balance 3 at home and do my job, I think one of the things that has been effective is to, again, ally with others and create a network for me that supports what I'm doing and sort of helps me not look at what I'm not doing, but look at what I am doing. And having that support system has been really, really helpful. Whether that you find that within the university or outside the university, I think that's key. And then the other part of that is, find the people who maybe can call, I wouldn't say call the person out, but actually talk to this person and educate them about what some of the faculty are going through. Again, this is the culture that we try to create. We need to set that at UCSF as an expectation, and maybe move away from what so the other generation might have thought.
Yes. Dr. McLeod, anything to add?
No, I think that's very well stated. Again, it's just a part of the overall sort of shift in culture that I think will get a little easier, over time, hopefully.
Absolutely. We have time for at least one more question, and this is a follow-up. Again, I think it's on everyone's mind these days, is the notion of DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is, I guess, a follow-up to our previous discussion. And it asks about accountability, feedback, transparency. And so what departments doing to move forward with this in terms of respect to the issue of DEI, in terms of having some accountability and providing feedback and transparency. And I assume it had to do with this pipeline issue. And how do you address that as chairs? I know that's kind of a complex kind of question, but if there's any further thoughts around that, I think it's what this participant is looking for. Sure, Dr. McLeod.
Well, so if the question is sort of how are we looking at it sort of at a departmental level in terms of accountability. So I think one of the big concerns that people have is that there's a moment in time where there's a lot of sentiment, but how durable is it, and are we actually doing anything that sort of at the department level that really is making change and that engages more than just the people who happen to be either directly impacted or most outspoken. So what, just for one particular model, and I get the sense the same dialogue is happening, in lots of different departments, is we started off with, a chair for diversity, equity, inclusion. Of course, the same thing happens that you expect to happen, which is all of a sudden one person sort of feels that they have the entire world on their shoulders. What we very, very quickly moved to was essentially a department-wide task force that is charged to really look at this, as we alluded to earlier, from a shift in culture point of view. So we have representation from our education leadership, from our clinical leadership, from our clinical research, from our basic research leadership. We have representation from our staff. And essentially, this is sort of an ecumenical group that is really charged with how do we develop and sustain the culture shift. You know, we did the thing for the diversity inclusion training. We actually just took a faculty retreat, and everybody sort of got their exposure training all at once. We've incorporated these discussions into our regular faculty meetings. They'll be incorporated in our faculty retreat. But the idea is to try to pick as many touch points as possible, so that it's always part of conversation, and to make sure that there are as many different people engaged as possible, because, you know, as we've talked about, it's really that constant incorporation into culture that is going to then really secondarily allow the reflection, the accountability, and so on.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a couple of more minutes, but I just want to shift a little bit different, and hopefully I'm not throwing you a curveball here, but we've talked about a lot of different topics, and I think you've imparted like excellent wisdom and very concrete and specific tools. But I wanted to just turn to you and say, are there any things that we haven't covered that you would like to share, keeping in mind we're speaking primarily to early career faculty? So just an opportunity to just pick your brain and something that you may, you know, have a passion about that we haven't spoke about. I realize that was a bit of a curveball, but
I'm going to be a cheerleader here, and I'm going to say this is a crazy time in the world, unparalleled time, incredibly stressful, intense time, and it sounds like almost everyone on this call is embarking on the biggest adventure of their lives, or they're just briefly into that. And I would say, and I find I'm an eternal optimist, but there are opportunities in all of this COVID-related research, discovering new and creative ways to do things that we did the same way all the time. And I would say take advantage of this unique time, a pivotal moment, to potentially help direct us in new ways. So bring energy and bring passion and bring creativity, because that's what we're going to need to get ourselves out of it.
Thank you for that.
And maybe I'll just add that, you know, one of the strengths of UCSF is the voices of the people here. And so when there is change to be made, it really generally doesn't, you know, it often comes from the faculty, and it comes from those people who are experiencing whatever challenges that come before them. So I would encourage you to, you know, make that voice heard, whether that's to your chair or to your sponsors or to your colleagues, because that's really how the university will even become a better place.
Thank you. Before we close out. So we're actually right at on time here. So I think I'll just stop by saying thank you so very much. I just think this was an exceptional discussion. I know we covered a lot of ground, but I think it's helpful, and we did speak to the concerns of our participants. So we heard you spoke to things that are in their mind and their hearts right now, and so I can't say thank you enough. And I think this was exceptional. And I think this will end our time with you. So you could feel free to turn off your cameras, and we'll continue. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. To To our participants, I want to say thank you also for hanging in there and for your questions. I think this was super fruitful. So we have a 15-minute break right now. At 2:30, you will have the concurrent workshops. You should have received an email with a Zoom link to the particular workshop that you're interested in participating. I understand there'll also be on slide here shortly links for you to also copy and paste, or for you to make note of if you did not receive that email. So again, thank you so very much. Please come back in at 2:30 and sign in to the particular workshop that you're interested in participating in. You can check your emails or look on this. There'll be a slide here showing you which what the sessions are. So 2:30. Thank you. Bye-bye.